Hunt, you are up for 5 minutes. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, sir. Thank you for your prior service as well. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your time here. Energy is kind of a oil and gas energy, BLM, big deal to me, from Houston, Texas, known as the energy capital of the world. The entire energy corridor is in my district. That makes me the energy congressman of the entire world. So this is why this is something that for me is very, very important that we get right, that we have timely leases, that we have these companies that can predict their future, that they can continue to build and grow, provide energy not just for us, not just for the U.S., but also for our allies. And so with that being said, I have two questions for you. On November the 30th, 2022, the Bureau of Land Management proposed an updated venting and flaring rule. Are you familiar with that, sir?
I am.
Okay. What's the purpose of establishing this greenhouse emission reporting framework for BLM and venting and flaring? And my question for you is, shouldn't any action for the BLM be harmonized with the EPA that already had an existing rule?
So we did coordinate and had discussion with the EPA, but the rule is really to minimize the waste of resources. And so the rule, again, is put in place to ensure as we develop land or developer develop lands, they have a minimization plan, and they're taking action to mitigate the impacts on the environment and the resources.
So I understand that, but I think a lot of companies that are in my district that do operate on federal lands, their concern is that what you just described is actually not what's happening in real life on the ground. So what's happening on the ground is this: they have to adhere to two completely separate standards. Are you familiar with these companies having to adhere to two separate standards?
I know we have worked to coordinate with the EPA to ensure that we're not in conflict, and it's my understanding we're not. The rule we're putting in place is for the resources that Congress told us to manage.
So you believe that right now the rules that you have set are in conjunction with the EPA entirely, meaning that you think that there is actually only one standard, even though there's two separate rules that are two separate entities that are dictating rules?
I believe our rule is not in conflict with what the EPA is doing, and I believe our rule will allow, again, the BLM, as it permits resources for those to be managed to mitigate those impacts from greenhouse gases or others.
Yes, sir. So moving forward, just something to look at, please, if there is a way that these companies can look at just one rule. And I hear what you're saying, I understand what you're trying to do, but if there is a way, and I know that I'm a military guy, so I get this, but if there is a way where these companies could say, hey, the EPA has the exact same rules would be in BLM, and not necessarily even being harmonized with, just a simple rule or a simple standard when it comes to these greenhouse gases and emissions, I think that would be greatly appreciated. My next question is, are you familiar with communitization agreements?
What, I'm sorry?
Communitization agreements?
I am.
You are? Could you briefly describe what these agreements do and the timeline that you would like to see these agreements move through this process?
Well, first I should say each agreement has its own complexity.
Okay.
So timeline would be as expeditiously as we can. But when you have multiple owners where resources may intermingle, we then will get a communitization agreement to be formed. And the intent is so the parties can agree on the development, how best to develop that without conflict with each other.
Right.
And again, each one stands on its own because the complexity could be from simple complexity to major complexity.
Okay. I understand that. I think there's been a lot of bureaucracy that we've seen implemented. And I think a lot of these companies literally just want to know what the standards are going to be moving forward for the future. Some of these agreements, in my understanding, there's a company that's reported that some of these agreements took 720 days. Based on your answer, that's probably a very complex agreement that took longer than what anybody could have ever anticipated. However, I do think that 720 days is still a bit egregious. Streamline standards and expectation management and keeping that for the next 5 to 10 years, I think what a lot of companies want to see. We could have extraordinarily stringent regulations. In fact, our country has the most strict and the most stringent regulations in the entire world. I deployed to Saudi Arabia. I've been to Iraq. I understand this. It doesn't matter. As long as we have a standard that is going to be the same standard moving forward so that these companies can predict their workload and leases and agreements, what needs to be done, is all we're asking. Thank you so much for your time. I'll yield back the rest of my time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Ned, that is